He was worth $3 billion. She was worth exactly $47 and some loose change rattling at the bottom of a worn travel bag. He owned towers of glass and steel across 4 cities. She owned one pair of shoes without a hole in the sole, and those were the ones she wore to the interview. Neither of them knew that on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, one awkward, completely idiotic joke from a billionaire who should have known better was going to detonate like a grenade in both their lives. And absolutely nothing, not his money, not her pride, not the walls they had both spent years building, was ever going to be the same. If a story about 2 broken people building something real from nothing sounds like your kind of thing, hit subscribe right now. Drop your city and country in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story is traveling. And if you want to know what happens next, like this video and stay until the very end, because trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming. The rain came down hard that morning. Not the gentle, cinematic kind of rain that makes people look thoughtful and beautiful through coffee shop windows. This was October rain, cold, aggressive, and completely indifferent to whether you had an umbrella or not. The kind that soaks through a jacket in 40 seconds flat and turns the gutters into small, furious rivers. Emily Carter had no umbrella. She stood on the sidewalk outside a place called Ashcroft Auto, staring at the hand-painted sign above the garage door like it might suddenly rearrange itself into the name of a better opportunity. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead. The folder she carried, plus 3 copies of her resume, 2 reference letters, and a certificate she'd earned by staying up until 2 in the morning for 6 straight weeks, was now see-through with moisture despite being pressed hard against her chest. She looked down at the folder, then up at the sign. Then she exhaled through her nose in that particular way people do when they are out of options and they know it. The listing had said, receptionist wanted, front desk management, organizational skills a plus, inquire within, $43 in her checking account, her mother's next physical therapy appointment in 11 days, rent due in 9. Emily pushed open the door and walked inside. The shop smelled like motor oil, old coffee, and whatever industrial cleaner someone had used on the concrete floor about 3 days too late to matter. The front office was a disaster. There was no other word for it. Papers were stacked in towers that leaned at angles, suggesting they were one small vibration away from collapse. A whiteboard on the wall held a schedule written in at least 4 different colors of marker, with lines crossed out and rewritten until it looked less like an organized calendar and more like abstract art. 2 phones sat on the front desk, one with a sticky note reading broken, do not use, the other ringing with a persistence that suggested it had been ringing for a while without anyone answering. A parts catalog was being used as a coaster. Emily stood at the entrance, dripping quietly onto the mat, and took it all in. Behind the desk, half buried in a stack of invoices that clearly had not been touched in weeks, sat a man she almost didn't notice. He was maybe 32, 33, with dark stubble that was right on the line between intentional and I forgot to shave, wearing a gray Henley with a smear of grease near the left shoulder. He had reading glasses pushed up into his hair, the kind you push up and forget about, and he was squinting at a piece of paper like it had personally offended him. He did not look like someone worth $3 billion. That was, of course, entirely the point. Damien Ashcroft looked up when he heard the door. His eyes went from her dripping hair to the destroyed folder pressed against her chest to her face, and something flickered there. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. Like he knew what it looked like when someone arrived somewhere already braced for the answer to be no. "Hey," he said. "You hear about the receptionist position?" "Yes." She stepped forward, extending the folder. "Emily Carter. I saw the listing yesterday afternoon." He took the folder carefully, noticed it was damp, and set it on the one clear corner of the desk without comment. He opened it, looked at the top page. She stood there, dripping. The ringing phone kept ringing. Damien glanced at the phone, then back at her resume, then, and this was the part he would spend a considerable amount of time cringing about later, he opened his mouth. "Well," he said, "what I'm actually looking for might be closer to a wife." Complete silence. The phone stopped ringing, as if even it needed a moment. Emily stared at him. Damien stared back, and then the full weight of what he had just said landed on him, visibly, like a dropped engine block. He watched her expression shift from surprised to something far colder. and he opened his mouth again. That was... I didn't... He set down the resume, took off his reading glasses from where they'd been sitting in his hair, then had nothing to do with them, so he put them back. That came out wrong. I'm sorry. That was a stupid thing to say, and I don't know why I said it. Do you say things like that to everyone who applies, Emily said, or just the women? Just... He stopped. No, I don't. I've never said anything like that in my life, actually, which makes it worse. I think I was nervous. She looked around the office, at the teetering paper stacks, at the parts catalog coaster, at the whiteboard that appeared to be having a breakdown. You were nervous? She repeated. I'm aware of how that sounds. The phone is ringing. It does that. He looked at it. I don't know how to make it stop. Emily walked to the desk, leaned past him, close enough that he caught a faint smell of rain and something light, like soap, and picked up the receiver. Ashcroft Auto, this is Emily. How can I help you? She listened. Yes, sir. Let me check the schedule. She looked at the whiteboard, made one fast, efficient sweep of it with her eyes. Your vehicle will be ready Thursday by noon. You'll get a call when it's finished. A pause. Of course. Have a good day. She set the phone down, turned back to Damien. You have 6 appointments tomorrow that aren't written on the board, she said. And whatever this color means, she pointed at the green marker entries. Those jobs are probably overdue. He looked at the board, then at her. Green is overdue, he said. I figured. She picked up her damp resume from the desk and squared it. If you're done with the marriage jokes, Mr. Damien, just Damien. Mr. Damien, I'd like to interview for the receptionist position. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 30 years old, and she had been a lot of things before she walked into a drowning auto shop on a Tuesday. She had been a billing coordinator at a medical clinic for 4 years before the clinic was absorbed by a larger system, and her entire department was eliminated via a mass email sent at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. She had been a daughter, continuously, for 30 years, but especially in the last 18 months, since the car accident that had left her mother Margaret with a fractured hip, a shoulder that required 3 rounds of surgery, and a recovery that the doctors kept revising in the wrong direction. She had been the person who stayed. She was not broke because she was careless. She was broke because the universe had presented her with a series of choices that were not really choices, and she had made every one of them without flinching, and the math at the end had come out negative. She told Damien almost none of this in the interview. She told him her relevant experience, her system management skills, her familiarity with scheduling software, billing procedures, customer communication. She told him one thing that was personal, but she told it plainly and without apology. I need to leave every afternoon between 2 and 2:45, she said. 45 minutes. I won't be reachable by phone during that time. I'll make sure the phones are covered before I leave, and I'll catch up on anything I missed when I get back. Damien leaned back in his chair, which made a sound suggesting it had not been adjusted in years. Every day? Every working day, yes. Can I ask why? I have a personal obligation I can't move. He studied her for a moment. Most employers would have pushed. She had the expression of someone prepared to answer that push with a chair pushed back and a hand extended for the return of her resume. Okay, Damien said. She blinked. Okay? Okay, that's fine. You were going to take care of something personal. You said you'd cover the phones before you left. I don't see a problem. He shrugged. Adults have lives. That's not a strange concept. Emily looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, like she was recalibrating something. 43 hours a week, she said. At $14.50 an hour. He'd been about to offer 13. Deal, he said. She started the following Monday. By Wednesday, she had answered every outstanding email in the inbox, which had apparently been a source of anxiety for Damien for approximately 3 weeks. By Thursday, she had reorganized the scheduling system into something a human being could actually read. By the end of her first week, she had recovered 2 invoices that had never been sent to customers. And when she handed Damien a printed summary of the recovered revenue, he looked at the number on the page and then at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. You found this in 1 week, he said. It was in the filing cabinet, she said, in the drawer labeled miscellaneous. I labeled that drawer. I know. He put the paper down. Good call on not putting that in your first week performance review. I didn't know I was getting a performance review. You're not. I made that up just now. He picked up the paper again. Thank you, seriously. She gave a small nod and went back to the front desk. She did not tell anyone about her mother for 3 weeks. She arrived at 7:45 every morning. She left at 2 on the dot and returned at 2:48. She answered the phones with a patience that the mechanics in the back, 3 guys named Roy, Curtis, and a 19-year-old called Skeeter, whom no one had ever heard called by his actual name, described among themselves as almost supernatural, especially given what some customers were like. Roy was 56 and had been with the shop for 9 years. He was deeply suspicious of Emily for about the first 4 days. Then she correctly identified a billionaire that had been costing the shop money for months without anyone catching it. And after that, he brought her coffee every morning without being asked or acknowledged. Curtis was quieter. He watched people before he trusted them, and he watched Emily for 2 full weeks before he said anything beyond professional necessity. What he eventually said was, "You don't have to pretend the schedule doesn't stress you out. The schedule's a mess. It stresses all of us out." Emily had looked up from the whiteboard. "I'm not pretending. The board's still a mess. It's less of a mess than it was." Curtis had considered this. "True," he'd said, and gone back to the bay. Skeeter, who was 19 and had no filter whatsoever, had asked her directly on day 5 why she left every afternoon. "Personal obligation," she said. "Like a kid?" "No." "A medical thing?" "Skeeter." "Yeah?" "Don't." He'd nodded very quickly. "Okay. Got it. Sorry." Damien watched all of it. That was the thing about owning a small shop instead of sitting in a glass office. You were there. You saw people. You watched how they moved through a space, how they handled the hard moments, who they were when something went wrong and no one was recording it. He saw Emily reroute an entire day's schedule on the fly when a parts delivery came in 3 hours late, making 4 phone calls in 22 minutes that kept every appointment intact. He saw her handle a customer who came in screaming about a bill she was certain was wrong. Emily had let the man say his piece completely, then quietly pulled the original estimate and the final invoice side by side on the counter and walked him through every line without once raising her voice. The man had left without apologizing, which was no surprise, but he had left, and he had paid, and he had left Emily standing at the counter with an expression that was professionally neutral except for her jaw, which was tight. Damien had come out from the back to find her at her desk with a pen in her hand, writing nothing, the pen just pressed to paper. "He was wrong," Damien said. "I know." "The estimate was accurate." "I know." He didn't say anything else. Just went to the small coffee machine in the corner, poured 2 cups, and set one in front of her. She looked at it, then up at him. Then she picked it up and went back to work. That, he thought, was probably the moment. Not that he'd have admitted it to anyone. He found out about her mother on a Thursday afternoon in week 3. He wasn't trying to pry. He'd gone to his car in the small parking lot behind the shop to get a phone charger he'd left in the glove compartment, and he'd heard a voice. Emily's voice, different from her work voice, softer and quicker, coming from beside the dumpster, where apparently she went to make her personal calls. He stopped walking. "I know, Mom, I know, but the appointment is Tuesday, and we'll know more then." A pause. "No, it doesn't cost extra. I already checked." Another pause. "Because I looked at the bill, Mom. That's how I know. Will you let me worry about the bill?" A shorter pause. "I'm not yelling. I'm not yelling." She was quiet for a moment, then, very softly, "You're going to be fine. Okay? You're going to be fine." Damien walked back into the shop the long way, through the bay, so she wouldn't see him. He stood near the tool rack for a moment with the charger in his hand, not really seeing anything. Roy was changing a brake line 3 feet away and said, without looking up, "Her mom's recovering from something. She doesn't talk about it." "I know," Damien said. "She covers that 2 o'clock slot so clean you'd never know she leaves." "I know that too." Roy glanced at him. "Just saying." "Yeah," Damien said. "I know." He knew something else too. He knew that Emily had not told anyone who he was, and he suspected it was not because she didn't know. A woman who could audit 3 weeks of invoices and recover $1,200 of missing revenue in 4 days did not miss the detail that the name on the building matched the last name of the man sitting behind the desk in a greasy Henley, pretending to struggle with scheduling software. She had simply chosen not to make it a thing. He found that, he had no cleaner word for it, remarkable. The world he came from was a world where knowing who Damien Ashcroft was changed how people talked to him, sat near him, laughed at things he said. It was a particular kind of exhausting loneliness. You were never quite sure whether people were responding to you or to the number that followed your name around like a shadow. Emily had known, or suspected, or guessed, and she had shown up at 7:45 and done her job. He did not take that lightly. What he took more seriously than he wanted to admit was the afternoon in her 4th week when she came back from her 2 o'clock break 10 minutes late, the first and only time it had happened. And she came through the door with her coat still buttoned wrong and a look on her face she was working very hard to keep off her face. She sat down at her desk, straightened the stack of invoices, picked up the phone, started to dial a number, then set it back down. Damien came out from the back office. "Hey," he said. She looked up. The look was almost gone. Almost. "The 2:40 call back to Mrs. Hennessy," she said. "I'm getting to it right now. Emily." She stopped. "Is your mom okay?" The question sat there. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, at the window, where the rain from that morning had finally dried to salt streaks on the glass. "They're adjusting her medication again," she said. They're not sure it's working the way it should, so they're adjusting it." She straightened the invoices again, unnecessarily. "It's fine, it's just an adjustment." "That sounds like something that would scare someone," he said. She didn't answer right away. "Mrs. Hennessy," she finally said and picked up the phone. Damien went back to the office. He sat at his desk, actually sat, not pretending to look at invoices, and thought about a woman who carried everything alone because she had gotten so used to being the only person there that she had stopped noticing the weight of it. His daughter Sophia was 7 years old and sleeping at her grandmother's house tonight and would want pancakes in the morning, and he would make them because that was the kind of father he was trying to be, the kind who was actually there, in the small things, in the ordinary things, in the things that didn't look like love from the outside but were, completely, from the inside. He thought about what it looked like to be the person who stayed. He looked at the door Emily was sitting behind. He did not do anything with that thought. He was not ready to, and he knew it. But he stopped pretending he wasn't having it. On Friday afternoon, before she left, Emily stopped at the door with her bag over her shoulder. "Damien." He looked up. "The green entries on the whiteboard," she said. "I rescheduled the 2 oldest ones for Saturday morning. Roy said he can come in. I told the customers it's a courtesy appointment, no charge for the diagnostic." He stared at her. "You comped 2 diagnostic appointments out of my backlog." "You were losing the customers anyway," she said. "This way you might keep them." She pushed the door open. "Emily?" She paused. "Have a good weekend," he said. She looked back at him. Something small and almost surprised moved across her face. "You too," she said. And she walked out into the afternoon, back to her 45-minute life, back to a mother who needed her, back to the weight she carried without complaint. Damien sat at the desk in the quiet shop and thought, "I have never in my life met anyone like her." Then he picked up a pen and wrote himself a note in the margin of an invoice, where he would actually see it, give her a raise before she figures out she deserves one. The raise happened on a Monday. Damien had written the note to himself on a Friday, lost it under a stack of parts orders over the weekend, found it again Monday morning stuck to the bottom of his coffee mug, and decided that if the universe was going to work that hard to remind him, he should probably listen. He waited until Emily had been at her desk for 20 minutes and had already answered 3 calls, reorganized the day's appointment flow around a no-show in the 8 o'clock slot, and corrected a pricing error on an estimate Curtis had written up Friday afternoon without anyone asking her to. Then he walked out of the back office with a single sheet of paper and set it on her desk. She looked at it, then at him. "What's this?" "Revised employment terms," he said, "effective this week." She picked it up. He watched her eyes move across the page. The number was $2 above what she'd negotiated on day one, plus a small monthly bonus tied to customer retention, which, given what she'd been doing with the scheduling and the follow-up calls and the 2 comped diagnostics that had already turned into 2 loyal returning customers, was not charity. It was math. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know." "I haven't asked for—" "I know you haven't." He took his reading glasses off his head, actually off his head this time, not just pushed up, and held them in his hand. "Emily, you recovered more revenue in your first month than this shop generated in the 3 months before you got here. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting an error." She looked at the paper again. Her expression was difficult to read. Not overwhelmed, not tearful. Emily was not a tearful person, he was learning. But something careful was happening behind her eyes, like she was checking the offer from multiple angles for the catch. "There's no catch," he said, because he could see her looking for one. She looked up at him sharply. Then, after a moment, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Just the acknowledgement that he had read her correctly. "Thank you," she said, and she set the paper down and picked up the ringing phone, because that was Emily Carter. She didn't sit with good news. She got back to work. Damien went back to the office and stood there for a moment with the strange, specific feeling of having done something right. It was a feeling he did not take for granted. He had made enough wrong calls in enough boardrooms to know the difference. The shop had 4 employees now, technically: Roy, Curtis, Skeeter, and Emily. And it ran the way a 4-person operation almost never ran, which was smoothly. Not perfectly. Skeeter dropped a transmission pan on a Tuesday and flooded the bay floor with oil and spent 45 minutes cleaning it up, while Roy observed from a distance with the expression of a man who had seen this coming for weeks. Curtis had a running disagreement with a parts supplier that occasionally boiled over into phone calls that Emily would mute from the front desk by pressing the hold button with one finger, while she continued her own conversation without breaking stride. Damien himself had once spent 20 minutes trying to find the shop's insurance paperwork before Emily produced it from a clearly labeled folder in the cabinet she had reorganized in week 2. "It's under insurance," she had said, handing it to him. "I thought it was under miscellaneous." "I know, that's why I moved it." The shop was not perfect. It was a working garage in a mid-sized American city with aging equipment, unpredictable parts supply chains, and customers who ranged from politely difficult to aggressively unreasonable. But it had stopped bleeding, and it had started growing, and the people inside it had started to function as something that resembled, on good days, a team. Emily was the reason for most of that. She knew it and didn't say so. Everyone else knew it and mostly did say so, in the way mechanics say things, obliquely, without eye contact, while doing something else. Roy expressed it by leaving her coffee every morning and occasionally asking her opinion on scheduling questions that were technically none of her business and completely within her area of expertise. Curtis expressed it by starting to CC her on the estimate emails he sent to corporate fleet accounts, without being asked, because he'd noticed she caught things. Skeeter expressed it by saying, directly and without embarrassment, "Emily, you're like the only reason this place works," which made her look at him with an expression that was somewhere between touched and alarmed. "That's not true," she said. "Roy said it first," Skeeter said. "I'm just the only one who'll admit it out loud." Roy, from beneath the hood of a Silverado, said nothing, which was as close to confirmation as Roy ever got. What none of them saw, what Emily worked very carefully to keep them from seeing, was the cost of it, not the job. The job was fine. The job was, in a way she hadn't expected and couldn't entirely explain, genuinely good. It was the arithmetic of the rest of it that was quietly grinding her down. Her mother's insurance covered 60% of the physical therapy visits. The remaining 40%, per visit, twice a week, added up to a number that Emily tracked in a small notebook she kept in her bag and reviewed every Sunday night with the focused, somewhat grim attention of a general studying a map she does not love. The medication adjustment had added a new prescription to the list. The apartment had a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink that the landlord kept promising to fix and kept not fixing, which meant Emily had started keeping a plastic bin under there and emptying it every morning before she left. She did not mention any of this to anyone at the shop, not because she was ashamed, or not only because of that, but because she had been managing alone long enough that the idea of putting it down and letting someone else help carry it had become genuinely difficult to imagine, like a muscle that had been held tight for so long that relaxing it actually hurt. She went to see her mother every afternoon at 2. Margaret Carter was 61 years old, had the stubbornness of someone who had raised a daughter by herself on a bookkeeper's salary, and was currently conducting a prolonged argument with her physical therapist about the correct pace of her recovery. The therapist, a patient man named Dennis, who had clearly been in this argument before with other patients, maintained professionally that Margaret's pace was the appropriate pace. Margaret maintained that Dennis was wrong. Emily arrived every afternoon to find them mid-negotiation. She did 12 repetitions today, Dennis told Emily one Thursday, in the careful tone of someone delivering a mixed report. The goal was 8. I know the goal, Margaret said from the bed. The goal is slow for people who don't heal fast. Mom, I'm not being difficult, I'm being accurate. You are being both, Emily said. She sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at her mother's face, which was sharper than it had been 2 months ago, the color better. Dennis, how does the shoulder look? Improving, Dennis said. Genuinely, but the hip is fine, Margaret said. The hip needs more time, Dennis said to Emily, in the manner of a man who had accepted he was having 2 separate conversations simultaneously. Emily listened to both. She asked the right questions. She wrote down the answers in the same small notebook where she kept the insurance figures. She made sure her mother ate the dinner that sat on the tray getting cold because Margaret had been too busy arguing to eat it, and she sat there while her mother talked about the woman in the room next door who played the television too loud at night, and about the book she was reading, and about whether Emily was eating enough, and whether she was sleeping enough, and whether that job was treating her right. The job is good, Emily said. The man who runs it. What's he like? Emily considered this for longer than the question probably required. Honest, she said finally. He's honest. Margaret looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who had raised this specific daughter and knew what honest meant coming from her. That's a real answer, she said. Not just a polite one. Yeah, Emily said. It's a real answer. She drove home in the dark, emptied the bin under the sink, heated up soup she'd made Sunday, and portioned into containers because cooking every night was not a thing she had the bandwidth for. Sat at her kitchen table with the notebook open and a pen in her hand, and did the math for the week, and the math was still tight, but it was better than it had been 6 weeks ago, and that was something. She closed the notebook, put the pen down, looked at the wall for a moment. Then she went to bed, because tomorrow was a 5-appointment day, and the parts order from Tuesday had come in with 2 wrong items she'd need to sort out before 9. She was asleep in 4 minutes. Then, the busiest week of the year arrived in November, which nobody at Ashcroft Auto was quite prepared for, despite Emily having flagged it in October. Fleet season, she had told Damien, setting a printed calendar on his desk with certain weeks highlighted. Companies that run vehicle fleets, delivery trucks, service vans, they all want their maintenance done before end of year for tax accounting. It stacks up. 3rd week of November, every year. Damien had looked at the calendar. How do you know this? My last job was a medical clinic. Same principle. End of year billing crunch. It's just a different industry. He had nodded, made a note. And then the 3rd week of November arrived, and he understood, viscerally and with a slight feeling of panic, what she had meant by stacks up. 12 fleet vehicles booked across 5 days. 3 walk-in emergencies by Wednesday. A supplier delay on brake components that required Emily to source from an alternate distributor while simultaneously managing a customer who wanted to speak to the manager every 20 minutes. Roy's back went out Tuesday night, genuinely, not as an excuse. And he spent Wednesday and Thursday working at reduced capacity, which threw every estimate timeline sideways, which meant Emily spent 2 days making calls to customers explaining revised pickup times in a tone so professionally reassuring that multiple people thanked her for the inconvenience, which was a grammatically strange thing to be thanked for, but she had learned not to question it. Damien was in the Bay most of the week, filling in where he could, which turned out to be more than he'd expected. He had not worked on a car regularly in 2 years. His hands remembered faster than his confidence did. On Thursday afternoon, Emily came into the Bay looking for him. He was under a fleet van. had been for 40 minutes, and heard her shoes on the concrete before he saw her. "Hey!" He rolled out on the creeper, looked up at her. She was holding her phone. Her face was doing the thing again, the controlled thing, where she was keeping something out of her expression, and the effort of it was the only visible sign that there was something to keep out. "I need to talk to you about tomorrow," she said. He sat up. "What's going on?" She looked at the phone, then at him. "My mother has a medical evaluation tomorrow morning, at 9. It's not a routine one. Her doctor wants to assess whether the current treatment plan is working or whether they need to consider a different approach." She stopped. "It could go either way. I need to be there." The week's schedule ran through his head without him trying. Friday, 3 fleet vehicles, 2 of which needed to be out by noon, 1 walk-in that had already confirmed, Roy at maybe 70%, Curtis managing 2 jobs simultaneously. "Okay," he said. "I can come in after," she said quickly. "The appointment is 9. It shouldn't run past 11. I can be here by 11:30 and I can stay late. Emily," he stood up, wiped his hands on the rag hanging from his belt loop. "You don't need to negotiate this. The Friday schedule. I'll handle the Friday schedule." She looked at him. "You'll handle the Friday schedule." "Why do you look like that's a bad idea?" "Because," she said carefully, "the last time you handled the front desk was for 20 minutes in October when I was at the dentist. And when I got back, the printer was somehow printing in a language I didn't recognize and Mrs. Kowalski had called 3 times. The printer thing was unrelated to me. Damien. It was possibly slightly related to me." He crossed his arms. "But I've gotten better." "At what?" "At being out here, managing things." She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was working very hard not to say the obvious thing. It was one of her most expressive expressions somehow. "I'll get Roy to help at the desk," Damien said. "Curtis can take point on the 2 noon vehicles. I'll handle customer communication." "You don't know the Brennan account." "Tell me the Brennan account." She told him the Brennan account. Standing in the bay, next to a van he'd been lying under for 40 minutes, she walked him through the Brennan fleet contract, the account manager's name, the specific communication preferences, the invoice format they required, and the one thing, the single specific thing, that the Brennan account manager had mentioned twice and that Emily had written in bold in the account notes. "He hates being put on hold," she said. "If you pick up and he's there, do not put him on hold for any reason. Walk away from whatever else you're doing and handle it." "Don't put Brennan on hold," Damien repeated, "under any circumstances." "Got it." She studied him. He had the look of a man who had just been given a task that was harder than it appeared and knew it, but had committed anyway. "The Brennan invoice goes to accounting at brennanfleet.com, she said, "not the general inbox." "Accounting. I have it in the system, but if you're generating it manually—" "Emily," he put a hand up. "Go be with your mother tomorrow. I've got this." She stood there for another second, not because she doubted him, or not entirely, but because she was not used to being told, genuinely and without subtext, to go. To be in the place she needed to be without it costing her something at the place she was supposed to be. The 2 things in her life had been in tension for so long that the idea of them not being in tension, even for one morning, didn't quite fit the shape she'd built for it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She walked back toward the office, stopped at the bay door. "Damien." He looked up from the rag he was folding. "Thank you," she said. Simple, direct. Emily's version of a lot. "See you at 11:30, he said. She came back at 11:22. He had survived it. That was the most accurate description. The printer had not malfunctioned. That was a win. Roy had managed the desk with the energy of a man performing a task he found mildly beneath him, but was willing to do out of loyalty, which meant he answered the phone correctly, but with a tone that suggested he would prefer to be doing literally anything else, which several customers picked up on, but none of them actually complained about. So fine. Damien had handled customer communication by doing exactly what Emily had shown him, except slower and with a lot more checking of the notes she'd left him. The 2 noon vehicles went out on time. Curtis had run point without incident, if you didn't count the 20 minutes he and Damien had spent in the bay, talking in increasingly urgent voices about a brake caliper that was not where either of them expected it to be, until Skeeter, who had been listening from 3 feet away, said, "It's on the lower shelf, left side." And Curtis had looked at him, and then at Damien, and said, "How does he always know?" And Damien had no answer for that. Brennan had called at 10:15. Damien had picked up on the second ring. He had not put the man on hold. He had handled the call standing at Emily's desk with her account notes in front of him, and it had gone fine, actually fine, not disaster-avoided fine, because the Brennan account manager was not difficult if you spoke to him like he mattered, which Emily had apparently understood immediately, and which Damien was now understanding belatedly. He'd made one real mistake. The walk-in appointment, a woman named Patricia Cho, whose sedan needed a coolant flush, had been quoted one price by Damien and a slightly different price by the estimate sheet because Damien had not looked at the estimate sheet before opening his mouth. The difference was $14. Damien had absorbed it out of the register without fanfare and made a note to update the estimate template so this would not happen again. $14 and a note to himself. He could live with that. Emily had come through the door at 11:22, still in her coat, and Damien had been behind her desk, and she had stopped and looked at the whiteboard and the phones and the visible state of the office, and done a rapid professional assessment in about 8 seconds. "How bad?" she said. "Not bad," he said. "We're good. Brennan called at 10:15. "I know, I have the notification." She looked at the desk, which was mostly in order, except that the pens were in the wrong cup and he'd moved her notebook 3 inches to the left. "Patricia Cho? Coolant flush, done by 11, she already picked up. I quoted the wrong price by $14. I ate it. I made a note." Emily looked at him. "The note's on the yellow paper," he said, pointing. "Top right corner." She picked it up, read it, set it down. And then she did something she almost never did in the office. She exhaled, fully and visibly, the particular exhale of someone who has been holding their breath since leaving the house at 8:30 that morning, and who has only now, in this moment, allowed themselves to stop. "My mother's treatment plan is staying the same," she said, "which means it's working, which is, they think it's working." Her voice was level. The words were not. Damien stayed where he was, behind her desk, which was the wrong side of the desk to be on, but he didn't move, and neither did she. "That's good news," he said. "Yeah." She pressed her lips together. "Yeah, it is." Roy came in from the bay for a water bottle and looked at the two of them and then very deliberately looked at the ceiling. "Nice job keeping the ship running," he said, to the air, to no one in particular, and walked back out. Emily looked at the space where Roy had been. Then she took off her coat, hung it on the hook behind the door, and sat down at her desk. She moved the pens back to the correct cup, moved the notebook 3 inches to the right, looked at the whiteboard. "You left the Tillman appointment off the board," she said. "Tillman's tomorrow. It's on the system." "It should be on the board, too." "Then put it on the board," he said, and went back to the office. He sat down at his own desk, his actual desk, the one on the right side of things, and picked up his phone and stared at it without seeing it. He was thinking about the exhale, about what it had looked like to watch someone put something down, even briefly, even in the small way of knowing that one morning had gone right while she was somewhere else. He was thinking that he wanted to give her more of that, not in a grand way, not in any way she'd feel obligated by or uncomfortable with, just more of those moments where she didn't have to hold everything at once. He put the phone down. He had no idea what to do with that thought except let it sit there, which was more honest than he usually allowed himself to be about things like this. So he let it sit. The week closed out on a Friday afternoon that was genuinely, unremarkably fine, which felt like a small victory considering how it had started. Roy's back improved. The fleet invoices went out. The Brennan account confirmed receipt with a one-line email that Emily showed Damien with an expression that said, "See, I told you how to handle it." She had not said, "I told you" anything. That was just how her face worked. Skeeter, who had worked overtime Wednesday and Thursday without being asked, appeared in the office doorway Friday at 4:30 with his jacket on and asked if he could leave early because his girlfriend's dog had learned to open the refrigerator, and it was apparently a household emergency. Emily said yes before Damien even had time to weigh in, which was its own statement about how the lines of authority in this shop had quietly shifted over the past 2 months. After Skeeter left and Roy had gone, and Curtis had locked the bay, a process that always took longer than it should because Curtis was constitutionally incapable of leaving without checking every tool twice. Emily sat at her desk in the quiet shop, updating the weekly log. Damien came to stand in the doorway of the back office. He leaned against the frame. "You didn't eat lunch today," he said. She didn't look up. "I ate a granola bar. That's not lunch. It's adjacent to lunch." "In what way?" "It was food," she said. "Consumed at approximately noon. I'm calling it." He was quiet for a moment. The overhead light in the front office was the fluorescent kind that got slightly warmer toward evening, and it caught the angle of her face as she typed, and he thought, with the particular helplessness of a feeling that has gotten past your defenses before you noticed it arriving, she has no idea. No idea what she'd built here in 2 months. No idea that Roy, who trusted approximately 4 people on Earth, brought her coffee every morning not because it was a habit, but because it was a declaration. No idea that Curtis had told Damien, in the flat, non-negotiable way Curtis stated things, that if Emily ever left, he'd want a week's notice so he could emotionally prepare, which from Curtis was essentially a speech. No idea that Damien had restructured his entire morning routine so he arrived at the shop by 7:30, 45 minutes earlier than he had before she started, because the 15 minutes of quiet before she arrived, when he could hear her key in the lock and the door and her bag set on the desk, had become, inexplicably, the best part of his day. She didn't know any of that. And he was not going to be the person who told her, not yet, not when the ground between them was still being figured out, and she still checked every good thing he offered for the catch. "Go home, Emily," he said. She saved the log, closed the laptop, stood, and got her coat and her bag. At the door she stopped, the way she sometimes did. "You did okay today," she said. "Yesterday, too. The Brennan call." He raised an eyebrow. "Okay? Don't push it. I thought I did better than okay." "You did okay," she said, with a strong okay showing, leaning toward pretty good. "I'll take it." She almost smiled, that particular almost smile that showed up occasionally, and that he had started cataloging like an idiot, because apparently that was where he was now. "See you Monday," she said. "See you Monday." The door closed. Her car started in the parking lot. He heard it pull away. He stood in the empty office for a moment, in the fluorescent warmth, and thought about how 2 months ago this place had been a quiet disaster and a filing cabinet full of miscellaneous everything, and now it was something different, something that ran, something that people came back to. He turned off the light. He had promised Sophia pancakes in the morning, and he did not intend to break that promise. And he had not broken it once in 2 years, and that record mattered to him more than most of the things people assumed mattered to someone who had $3 billion and a name on a building. He locked the door and walked to his car. It was a Tuesday level car, nothing that would turn heads, nothing that announced anything. That was the point. He liked the anonymity. He liked being just a man locking up his shop on a Friday night. He liked it more lately than he had ever expected to. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was already a complicated day because the parts supplier had shorted them on brake pads again, and Curtis was conducting what could only be described as a sustained, low-grade war against the supplier's customer service line that had been going on since 9 in the morning. Emily found the envelope in the mail stack she sorted every morning before the phones got busy. It was from Mercy General Hospital, the large regional medical center 3 miles north, the kind of place with a dedicated HR department and a benefits package that came in a printed booklet. She recognized the logo because her mother had been a patient there twice. She set it aside, finished the mail sort, handled the 9 o'clock appointment check-in, answered 2 calls. Then, during a 4-minute window of quiet, she opened it. It was an interview invitation. The position was Administrative Coordinator, Medical Operations. The salary range listed at the bottom of the page was a number that made Emily sit very still for a moment in her chair. She read the letter twice, folded it, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in her bag. And then the phone rang and she answered it, and the morning continued the way mornings did, relentlessly and without waiting for anyone to finish processing anything. She did not tell Damien that day. She told herself it was because the timing was bad. Curtis's supplier situation had escalated to the point where he came in from the bay at 11:30 and stood in the office doorway with his phone in his hand and an expression that suggested things had been said that could not be unsaid. And Damien had spent 40 minutes on a call with an alternate supplier sorting out emergency delivery. It was a bad day to add anything to the pile. But if she was being honest with herself, and she tried to be, it was one of the few luxuries she allowed. She wasn't telling him because she didn't know what she wanted the answer to be yet, and she needed to know that before she said it out loud to anyone, let alone him. She went home that night and sat at her kitchen table with the letter in front of her and her notebook open beside it, and did the math in a way she hadn't done math in a while. Not just the immediate numbers, the salary difference, the benefits, but the larger shape of things. The security that a hospital system offered, insurance that came without the 40% gap she'd been quietly absorbing for 18 months, stability that didn't depend on one small shop staying solvent. And then she thought about the whiteboard, about the Brennan account, about Roy's coffee and Curtis's CC emails and Skeeter saying, "You're the only reason this place works," without any embarrassment at all. About a man who had taken over her desk on a Friday so she could be in a hospital room with her mother, who had eaten $14 of his own mistake without making it her problem, who had told her there was no catch and turned out to be right. She closed the notebook. She wasn't ready to decide anything, but she was going to the interview. She told Damien on Thursday. She waited until the afternoon lull, the quiet hour between the last morning appointment and the first afternoon one, when the shop settled into a working rhythm and the front office was briefly just a room with good light. She came to the doorway of his office, a reversal of his usual position, and stood there until he looked up from whatever invoice he was pretending to understand. "I have something to tell you," she said. He put the invoice down. He had learned over 3 months that when Emily prefaced things that way, she meant it, and the correct response was to stop whatever else he was doing. "I got a letter from Mercy General," she said. "They want to interview me for an administrative coordinator position." He looked at her. His expression did not change in the way she'd braced for, not the flicker of concern she'd been prepared to manage, not the careful neutrality of someone calculating their response. He just looked at her steady, the way he did when he was actually listening rather than waiting for his turn to talk. "When's the interview?" he said. "They asked me to suggest a date. I haven't replied yet." "What's the salary range?" She told him. He was quiet for a moment, not a calculating quiet, more like the quiet of someone absorbing a number and what it meant, for her, given what he knew about the notebook and the insurance gap he'd never been directly told about, but had clearly understood for months. "You should go," he said. She had expected this. She had told herself she expected this. But hearing it still landed somewhere unexpected in her chest. "I'm not saying I'm leaving," she said. "I know, but you should go to the interview." He leaned back in the chair, which made its usual protest. "Emily, I'm not going to act like this doesn't matter to me because that would be dishonest and you'd see through it anyway. But I'm also not going to ask you to turn down an interview because it would be convenient for me. That's not—" He stopped, started again. "That's not something I'm willing to do." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not even going to make a case for staying?" "I could," he said. "I have several. You've heard some of them." The corner of his mouth moved. "But a case you make because you're afraid someone will leave is different from a case you make because it's true. Right now I'm just saying, go see what they're offering. Know what your options are. That's not disloyal. That's smart." She was quiet. "And for what it's worth," he said, "whatever you decide, you've already changed this place. That's not going anywhere." She pressed her lips together in the way that meant she was done with this part of the conversation because it had gotten close to something she wasn't going to let get emotional in a workplace setting. "I'll reply today," she said. "I'm thinking next Wednesday. I'll make sure the schedule is covered. I can cover it before I leave." "I know you can. I'm saying you don't have to." She nodded once, short and precise, and went back to the front desk. Damien turned back to the invoice he'd been looking at, except he wasn't looking at it. He was thinking about a salary range that was real and fair, and significantly more than what he could offer in good conscience for a receptionist position, which was still the technical title on Emily's employment paperwork, even though her actual job had expanded so far beyond that word that the word had become almost funny. He was thinking about the fact that he had the money to match that offer 3 times over and had not yet said so, had not yet restructured her role to reflect what she actually did, had not moved fast enough on any of the things he'd been meaning to do. He had been so careful not to make her feel bought, because he knew what it felt like to wonder if people were responding to you or to your money, that he had perhaps waited too long to make her feel valued. He picked up his phone, not to call anyone, just to have something in his hand while he thought. He had a week. Wednesday came without drama, which was its own mild surprise. Emily had prepared everything before she left. The schedule was laid out. The Tillman account notes were on top of the desk where anyone could find them. The callback list for the afternoon was printed and annotated in her handwriting, which was small and precise and used abbreviations that had become their own internal language over 3 months. Roy had looked at the annotated callback list and said, to no one. She even wrote down how long each call should take. Skeeter had looked over his shoulder. That's so Emily. I know, Roy said. He sounded like a man confronting a thing he respected enormously and couldn't quite explain. Emily left at 8:30 and the interview clothes she'd changed into in the small bathroom at the back of the shop. A dark blazer, a gray blouse, the one pair of heels she owned that didn't hurt after an hour. She walked out past the bay and Curtis, who was under a truck, said without looking up, "Good luck." "Thank you," she said. "Not that you'll need it," he added, still to the underside of the truck. She drove to Mercy General with the radio off, thinking through the questions she'd prepared, the answers she'd shaped, the numbers she was willing to accept and the ones she wasn't. She was good at interviews. She knew this about herself without pride. It was just a skill, like the scheduling or the billing, something she'd built out of necessity. The interview lasted an hour and 15 minutes. 3 people on the panel. The questions were good, actually. Not the generic kind, but the specific kind that told her this was an organization that had thought about what it actually needed. She answered them honestly. She did not oversell herself or undersell herself. She asked the questions she'd prepared and 2 she thought of in the room. She drove back to the shop thinking, it went well. That was the uncomplicated part. She returned to find the shop running as she'd left it arranged for it to run. Damien was at the front desk. Not sitting at her desk, but standing near it, on a call, with her printed callback list in his hand. He looked up when she came in, finished the call, and set the list down. "How was it?" he said. "Good," she said. "They're a solid operation." "Are they offering what the letter said?" "Probably. They didn't discuss numbers today. Second conversation." He nodded. He was trying to be neutral and doing a respectable job of it. She could tell because the neutrality had a quality of effort to it, a slight tension at the jaw, the kind that wasn't there when he was naturally calm. "There's something I want to talk to you about," he said. "Not today. You just got back and the Tillman account called and needs a call back before 4. But this week." "About?" "Your role here," he said. "The actual shape of it, which I should have addressed 2 months ago." She looked at him, then at the callback list. "I'll do the Tillman call," she said, and picked it up. And that was the end of the conversation for the day. But she thought about it on the drive home, about what it meant that he'd said this week, and not if you decide to stay. Like the conversation about her role was separate from the conversation about her options. Like he was making a distinction she hadn't quite expected. Thus, the week contained, as most weeks did, several things that had nothing to do with the large things and were in the way anyway. One of those things arrived on Friday morning in the form of a man named Gerald Marsh. He drove a silver sedan that he parked sideways across 2 spots, which was the first data point. He came through the front door with the energy of someone accustomed to a room reorganizing itself around his arrival, which was the second. He was maybe 55, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a jacket that announced itself. He looked at the front office with the expression of a man performing an assessment and not being impressed by the results. "I need to speak with the owner," he said to Emily, who was at the front desk. "Of course," she said. "Can I ask what this is regarding?" "Fleet contract." He named a company. Marsh Logistics, which Emily knew immediately because she knew the regional fleet operators the way she knew the parts suppliers, by name and reputation, and the notes she'd compiled over 3 months. Marsh Logistics ran 47 commercial vehicles in the metro area. The contract he was implying, if he was here about what she thought he was here about, would be one of the largest single accounts the shop had ever held. "I've been doing some research into local operators," Marsh continued, "and I'm considering Ashcroft for our maintenance contract. I have some specific requirements." "Absolutely," Emily said. "Let me get Damien for you. Can I get you some coffee while you wait?" "Just water," he said, without looking at her, already turning to study the shop visible through the glass partition into the bay. She got him water. She went and knocked on Damien's office door, opened it, and said quietly, "Gerald Marsh is here." "Marsh Logistics. He's talking about a fleet contract." Damien's eyebrows went up. "Marsh Logistics. 47 vehicles. I know who they are." He stood up, pulled on the clean shirt he kept on the hook behind the door for exactly these occasions, a habit she'd noticed and never commented on. "What's he like?" She considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "Careful," she said, which was not the word she'd originally reached for, but was the professional version of it. Damien looked at her. She gave him the small nod that meant, "I'll explain later," and he went out to meet Gerald Marsh. She sat at her desk and listened to the conversation, which she could hear through the partition without trying. Damien was good in these situations, unhurried, direct, knowledgeable about his own operation without being defensive about its size. Marsh asked reasonable questions, the kind you'd ask if you were seriously considering a business relationship. The conversation moved well. Then Marsh said something that changed the temperature of the room, at least for Emily. He was discussing communication protocols, who would be his primary contact, how invoicing would work, what the reporting structure looked like. All standard. And then he said, gesturing broadly in the direction of the front desk, "I'll want to deal directly with you or your lead mechanic. No offense, but I've had issues before with information getting filtered through front desk staff. Girls at reception tend to misunderstand the technical requirements." There was a pause. Emily did not look up from her computer. She kept her eyes on the screen. She was very specifically looking at an invoice and seeing none of it. In the pause, she heard Damien say, "I'm sorry?" "Nothing personal," Marsh said. "I just prefer direct communication with whoever's actually making decisions. Receptionists are fine for scheduling, but for something at this level, Emily manages this operation," Damien said. His voice was level, completely level, which was somehow worse, for Marsh, than if it had been angry. "She what?" "She manages daily operations, scheduling, accounts, fleet communication, vendor relationships. She designed the tracking system we use for fleet maintenance. When the Brennan account calls, they call her because she's the one who understands their requirements better than anyone, including me." A beat. "She's not the receptionist. She runs the front end of this business. And any contract we sign with anyone goes through her because she's the one who will be implementing it." Emily had stopped pretending to look at the invoice. Marsh cleared his throat, the sound of a man recalibrating. "Well, I didn't mean to suggest—" "I know what you suggested," Damien said. Still level. Still completely, deliberately level. "And I want to be straightforward with you, because I think that's respectful to both of us. The way you just spoke about a member of my team is not something I'm willing to build a business relationship on. Not because I'm being precious about it, because I'm practical. If you don't take her seriously, you'll end up in a situation where you don't listen to her, and then something will go wrong with your fleet maintenance, and it'll be because you didn't take her seriously. That's bad for you." Marsh was quiet. "I appreciate you coming in," Damien said. "If you want to revisit the conversation with a different starting point, I'm available, but I'm not going to adjust how I structure my team to make a contract easier to sign." Emily heard the sound of a chair, then footsteps, then the front door. She did not move for approximately 4 seconds. Then she heard Damien's footsteps coming toward the front office, and she looked up because there was no good reason to pretend she hadn't heard all of that. And he came through the doorway and stood there, and she looked at him, and he looked back, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "Marsh Logistics," she finally said. "Yeah. 47 vehicles. I know the math, Emily. She looked at her hands on the desk, then up at him. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said. It wasn't dramatic, just factual. The way he stated things when he'd already decided them. You want coffee? I need coffee. Damien, I know it was a big contract. He moved to the coffee machine. I also know what it would have looked like every day if I'd signed it. Every interaction you had with that man, every invoice, every fleet update call, with him having already said that about you, to your face, in your own office, while I stood there. He poured 2 cups, didn't ask, set one in front of her. That's not a business relationship I want. It's not one you'd want either. She looked at the coffee, then at him. He might have adjusted, she said. Not because she believed it, more like she was testing the conversation, pressing on it to see where it was solid. He might have, Damien agreed, but the starting point of that relationship is him thinking you're a girl at a reception desk who doesn't understand technical requirements. He picked up his own cup. I don't want to spend 6 months proving him wrong about something he never should have said. You shouldn't have to either. The thing was, she had been in that situation before. At the medical clinic, in the last year before the acquisition, a department director who had spoken around her in meetings to her male colleagues about billing decisions that were entirely her domain. She had managed it professionally and without complaint, and it had cost her in the quiet daily way things cost you when you spend energy on things that shouldn't require energy. She had not told Damien this, but she had the strange sensation that he knew or knew enough. The contract would have been good for the shop, she said. Lots of things are good for the shop, he said. This one came with a condition I don't accept. He set his cup down. Respect isn't negotiable, Emily. Not here. She held his gaze for what was probably 3 seconds, but felt longer. Then she picked up her coffee and said, You know Skeeter is going to be devastated. He was already mentally spending the bonus. Damien laughed. It was a short, real laugh, the kind that didn't announce itself. I'll buy him lunch. That won't cover it. I'll buy him lunch twice. She almost smiled. You turned down a 47-vehicle contract and you're offering lunch compensation. It's a good lunch place, Thai place on 5th. You've never been? She shook her head. Then I owe you lunch too, he said. Not as compensation, just... He stopped. She waited. Just lunch, he said. The word sat there a beat longer than it needed to. Emily picked up a pen, turned back to the invoice on her screen, the one she'd been not reading when Marsh was in the room. I'll let you know about the second interview, she said. Whenever you're ready. She nodded. And he went back to the office, and she went back to the invoice, and the shop ran on the way it had learned to run, with a kind of quiet competence that had become its own statement about who they were. Roy came in from the bay at 11 to refill his water bottle and stopped at Emily's desk and set a slightly crumpled takeout menu in front of her. Thai place on 5th. He must have heard enough. Good lunch, he said, and went back out. Emily looked at the menu. Then at the doorway where Roy had disappeared. Then she looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a woman who finds herself continually caught off guard by people she has started to care about, which is its own specific kind of vulnerability. She put the menu in her desk drawer. Top drawer, not the miscellaneous one. Met. The Marsh story got around the shop by the end of the day in the way things got around the shop, which was through Skeeter, who had heard it from Roy, who had heard more of it than he'd admitted to hearing. Skeeter came to the front office at 3:30 and stood in the doorway with the expression of someone processing complicated feelings. So we lost the Marsh contract, he said. We did, Emily said. Because of what he said about you. That's accurate. Skeeter was quiet for a moment. He was 19 and had the emotional transparency of someone who had not yet learned to hide what he was thinking, which Emily had decided a long time ago she preferred to the alternative. That sucks, he said. That he said that. Not that Damien did the right thing, obviously. It just sucks that it was a choice at all. Yeah, she said. It does. You okay? She looked at him. The question was simple and direct, the way Skeeter always was, and it caught her slightly without her armor on. I'm fine, she said. You sure? Skeeter. Yeah. Thank you for asking. He nodded, slightly serious in the way he got when the stakes of a conversation clarified themselves to him. He wasn't going to let that stand, he said. Damien, I've worked here a year and a half, and I've never seen him let something like that stand. She looked back at her screen. I know, she said. And she did know. That was the thing she was quietly working through on the drive home, in the honest privacy of her own car with the radio off again. She knew it. She had watched it happen. She had heard the complete, unperformed evenness of Damien's voice when he said Emily manages this operation. Not as a correction offered for Marcia's benefit, but as a statement of fact that happened to be necessary, and that he would have stated with the same evenness in any room, to any person. That was not a small thing. She had worked for people who would have made a different calculation, had worked for people who had made a different calculation right in front of her, while she kept her face professional and her voice steady, and her feelings in the compartment she'd built for feelings that were not useful at work. Damien had not made a different calculation. He had made the only one he apparently considered available, and then gone to make coffee. She pulled into her parking space, sat in the car for a moment with her hands in her lap. She thought about the salary range from the Mercy General letter. She thought about the 45% of her mother's therapy costs that hospital insurance would cover that her current plan didn't. She thought about what it meant to have options, real ones, for the first time in a long time. And she thought about a man who had turned down 47 vehicles because of the starting point of a relationship, who had said respect isn't negotiable like it was the most obvious thing, like it was basic math, and then asked if she'd been to the Thai place on 5th. She was not ready to decide anything. But something had shifted in the calculus, and she knew it, and she was honest enough with herself to sit in the car for another minute and just let that be true. Then she got out, went inside, emptied the bin under the sink, heated up soup, opened the notebook, closed the notebook, went to bed, and for the first time in she couldn't remember how long, the math in her head was not only about money. The second interview with Mercy General was on a Thursday. Emily had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, methodically, without drama, in the kitchen at night after the soup was finished, and the notebook was open and the specific shape of what she wanted was becoming clearer than it had been the week before. She wrote down the number she would accept, the number she would counter with, the benefits that were non-negotiable, the ones she'd bend on if the salary was right. She had done this before, in other rooms, for other jobs, and she had always walked in knowing her floor and her ceiling and the distance between them, because the only thing worse than a bad offer was accepting it without knowing it was bad. What was different this time was the thing she'd been quietly examining all week, ever since she'd sat in her car in the parking lot after the Marsh conversation and admitted to herself that the math had changed. She had spent 3 months building something at a shop on a street that didn't appear in any business magazine and wouldn't for the foreseeable future. She had built it out of a filing cabinet labeled miscellaneous and a whiteboard that looked like a breakdown and a scheduling system held together by optimism and colored markers. She had done it the way she did everything, with her head down and her hands moving, and the specific stubbornness of someone who has learned that no one is going to hand you anything, so you build it yourself or you go without. What she had not accounted for when she walked through that door on a rainy October morning was that someone might notice, not manage her, not thank her in the performative way managers thank people they're relieved to have working for them, not give her a card at Christmas. Actually notice, the way Damien noticed, quietly, consistently, without making it about himself. She drove to the interview thinking about the Brennan account manager who called her by her first name and asked specifically for her when he called, which he had started doing by week 6. She thought about Roy's coffee, which had never once been explained or acknowledged, which was its own language she had learned to understand. She thought about what it meant that Curtis CC'd her on the estimate emails, not because she'd asked or because Damien had told him to, but because at some point in the last 3 months, Curtis had simply decided she was the kind of person whose eyes on something made the something better. She thought about the Thai place on 5th, which she still hadn't been to, which sat in her head like an unfinished sentence. Then she parked in the Mercy General structure, took the elevator to the 6th floor, and walked into the interview with her head level and her floor and ceiling memorized. It went well, better than the first one. The panel was smaller this time, just 2 people, the department head and the HR director, and the conversation was specific and practical in a way she respected. They knew what they wanted. She knew what she was worth. The salary offer landed at the top of the range in the letter, which she had not entirely expected, which told her they wanted her specifically and were willing to pay to make the ask convincing. She counteroffered anyway. 2,000 above. She had decided in the kitchen that she was not walking into any room and accepting the first number presented to her, ever, regardless of how good it sounded. There was a pause. The HR director glanced at the department head. "We can do that," the department head said. Emily had nodded, thanked them, said she needed 1 week to make her decision, which was the truth, and she would be in touch by the following Thursday. She drove back to the shop thinking, that's a real option. That's a real, solid, genuine option, which was exactly what she'd needed to know. She told Damien that afternoon. He was in the back office when she knocked, actually doing something this time. On the phone with what sounded like a corporate banking call, something about the shop's line of credit, and she waited in the doorway until he wrapped it up. He put the phone down and looked at her with the particular attention he'd developed of being fully present when she was in the room. "They offered top of the range," she said. "I countered. They accepted." He held her gaze. Something moved behind his eyes that he kept off his face, mostly, except for 1/2 second. "That's a good offer," he said. "It's a very good offer," she said. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed a week." He nodded slowly. He had his hands flat on the desk, which she had learned was his version of keeping himself still when he was thinking something he wasn't sure yet how to say. "You said you wanted to talk about my role here," she said. "You said this week." "I did say that." "It's Thursday." "I know what day it is, Emily." She waited. She was not going to make this easier than it was. Not because she wanted to be difficult, or not only, but because she needed to hear what he actually thought, not a version of it shaped around managing her expectations or keeping her comfortable. She could always tell the difference, and she needed the real one. He stood up, not in a dramatic way, just stood, because he apparently thought better on his feet, which she had noticed before. He came around the desk and leaned against the front of it, arms crossed, in the mode she recognized as Damien being honest with himself in real time. "Here's what I should have done 2 months ago," he said. "I should have restructured your title and your role to reflect what you actually do, which is not reception work. It hasn't been reception work since week 3. The title is wrong. The pay relative to the work is still wrong even after the raise. And the fact that you built this thing in 3 months without anyone formally acknowledging what you were building is my failure to track something I should have been tracking." She said nothing. "What you do here," he continued, "is operations management. You manage the front end, the accounts, the scheduling systems, vendor communication, fleet relationships. You've created processes we didn't have and fixed systems that were broken before I even knew they were broken. That's a specific job with a specific title and a specific market rate. And I should have been paying you that rate since at least month 2. "You gave me a raise," she said. "I gave you $2 an hour," he said flatly. "On a job that expanded to 3 times the scope it was hired for. That's not a raise that reflects reality. That's me being late." The thing about Damien, Emily had learned, was that he was capable of a quality she did not encounter often in people with power. The ability to hold himself accountable without making the accountability into a performance. He wasn't apologizing to make himself feel better. He was stating a mistake the way you state a calculation error, directly, without decoration, because you can't fix something you won't name. "What are you offering?" she said. He told her. The title first, operations manager. Then the salary, a number he'd clearly prepared because it came without hesitation, which meant he'd done the research and knew what the market bore and had added something to that. Then benefits, which the shop had not previously offered at the level he was now describing. Then a performance bonus structure tied to specific quarterly metrics she would have input in designing. He stopped. "There's one more thing," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "I want you to have formal authority over the processes you've already been running informally. Vendor relationships, scheduling systems, fleet account management, those should have your name on them, not mine. You built them. If someone calls about the Brennan account, they're calling for you. That should be official." Emily looked at him. She had the expression she sometimes got when she was running something through the full length of it, checking it against what she knew, testing for the catch she had long ago trained herself to find. "Why didn't you do this before the Mercy General letter?" she said. It was a fair question. He'd said as much himself. She wanted to hear his answer. He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet. "Because I was slow," he said. "I was managing something I didn't have a name for yet, and I was being careful about it in a way that made me slow about the practical thing. That's on me." He paused. "And because some part of me didn't want the conversation to look like I was trying to keep you here. I didn't want you to think that's what it was." "Is that what it is?" "Partly," he said. He was not going to lie about that. "But it's also just true. The offer is true independent of whether you take it or not. You've earned this title since October. The only thing that was stopping me from formalizing it was my own timing." She stood there in the office doorway with all of that in the air between them. The fluorescent light was doing its late afternoon thing, slightly warmer, slightly slower. The shop was quiet in the back. Curtis had gone home. Roy had gone home. Skeeter had left at 4 with the energy of someone who had remembered somewhere he urgently needed to be. It was just the two of them in the building, which was not unusual but felt different in this particular moment. "I need the weekend," she said. "Take it." "I'm not going to give you an answer because it's the easier answer," she said. "I'm going to give you the right one." "I know that," he said. "I'd be concerned if it was any other way." She nodded, picked up her bag from the front desk, her coat from the hook. At the door she stopped. She seemed to be thinking about something, and then she said it. "You should know that the Mercy General offer is real. It's significant, and if I decide it's the right choice, it will be because it's right, not because of anything you did or didn't do." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it so there's no confusion later." "There won't be." He met her eyes. "Either way." She pushed the door open, paused. "The Thai place on 5th, she said. "Is it the one with the green awning or the red one?" He blinked. "Green." "Okay," she said. And she left. He stood in the empty office for a moment. Then he went to the window that faced the parking lot and watched her car pull out, the way he sometimes did and had never admitted to anyone, including himself. The green awning, he thought. It was such a small thing. It probably meant nothing. He went home to make pancakes for Sophia, who had informed him that morning she would be requiring sprinkles, and he had promised sprinkles, and he was not a man who broke promises to his daughter. But he thought about the green awning for more of the evening than was strictly reasonable. Emily spent Friday night and Saturday with the notebook. Not in the grim Sunday night way she usually used it, the arithmetic of survival, the gap between what things cost and what she had. This time she was doing a different kind of math. The kind where you put two things side by side and try to see them clearly without the noise of fear or gratitude or whatever else gets in the way of clear seeing. On one side, Mercy General, stable, large, a system that had been operating for 40 years and would operate for 40 more. Benefits that would close the gap on her mother's therapy costs entirely. A salary that was the most she had ever been offered. A clean break from a situation that had, if she was being fully honest, started to feel complicated in ways that professional situations were not supposed to feel complicated. On the other side, a shop on an ordinary street with 4 employees and a whiteboard and a coffee machine that made terrible coffee and a filing cabinet that had once been labeled miscellaneous that now held organized records of every account, every vendor, every fleet relationship she had built in 3 months. A title she had earned before she was given it. A room full of people who had started trusting her before she gave them a reason to and had not stopped. And a man who turned down 47 vehicles and said respect isn't negotiable, like it was nothing, like it was just what you did. She wrote in the notebook for a while. Not columns, just words, the way you write when you're trying to hear yourself think. Then she closed it. She called her mother on Saturday afternoon. Margaret was having a good day. The hip had been better that week. Dennis had actually said the word progressing without caveating it immediately, which was new. She sounded more like herself than she had in 6 months. She asked about the job, both of them, with the directness of a woman who had not spent 61 years softening her questions. "The hospital job is real," Emily said. "The offer is good." "But," Margaret said. "I didn't say but." Emily Louise Carter, I have known you for 30 years. Say the but. Emily was quiet for a moment. The shop offered me operations manager, she said, with the title and the salary and the authority. Everything I should have had 2 months ago. And that feels like enough? It feels fair, Emily said. Which is different. Margaret was quiet for a moment on her end of the line. Emily could hear the television in the background. Margaret had apparently reached a detente with the woman in the next room because the volume was lower. The man who runs the shop, Margaret said. You said he was honest. He is. Is that still true? Emily thought about the office on Thursday afternoon, about I was slow said without self-pity, about the offer is true independent of whether you take it or not. Yeah, she said. That's still true. Then what are you afraid of? Margaret said. Emily opened her mouth, closed it. The question was more targeted than it appeared, and her mother knew it, which was the whole point. I'm not afraid, she said. Margaret made a sound that was not agreement. You've been taking care of yourself alone so long that accepting something good feels like a trap, she said. I know because I did the same thing for 15 years after your father left, and it is an exhausting way to live, and at some point you have to let the good thing be a good thing. Mom, I'm not telling you to take the shop job because of a man, Margaret said, with the precision of someone cutting off the interpretation before it could form. I'm telling you to take whichever job you actually want. Not the one that's safest, the one you want. There's a difference, and you know there is. Emily sat with that for a moment. The soup is getting cold, Margaret said. I can hear you thinking from here. Go think somewhere else and call me when you know. I love you, Emily said. I love you too. Eat something. She came in on Monday with the decision already made. She had made it Sunday night, not dramatically. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd let go cold, and at some point between 9 and 9:30, the answer had clarified itself with the particular quiet certainty of a thing you already knew and had been circling around for days. She had written it in the notebook. Then she had shut the notebook and gone to bed, and slept better than she had in 3 weeks. She arrived at 7:45, earlier than usual. Damien's car was already in the lot, which she had come to realize meant he arrived around 7:30, a fact she had catalogued somewhere in the back of her head without examining it too closely. She unlocked the front door, set her bag down. Did not take off her coat yet. Damien came out of the back office at 7:48 the way he always did, with his reading glasses pushed up into his hair. He stopped when he saw her standing at the front desk, coat still on. He read her face. She could see him reading it. I'm not taking the Mercy General position, she said. He stayed where he was. Whatever he was feeling, he kept it contained, which she respected. He did not do anything as undignified as look relieved, at least not in a way he allowed to show. Okay, he said, but I'm not accepting your offer as it currently stands either, she said. He raised an eyebrow. She took off her coat, hung it on the hook, turned back to him. The salary you offered, I want it in writing, tied to a 6-month review with defined metrics that we both agree on. I want the operations manager title on my employment paperwork, the actual paperwork, not a verbal agreement. I want the healthcare benefits effective the 1st of next month, not the standard 90-day waiting period. And I want a clear scope of authority that defines what decisions are mine to make without consultation and what decisions require your sign-off. She paused. And I want to be involved in hiring if we expand. Any position that intersects with operations comes through me. Damien looked at her for a long moment. He had the expression of a man confronting something that was both unexpected and entirely consistent with everything he already knew about the person in front of him. You sat with this all weekend, he said. I did. And these are your conditions. These are my conditions. He crossed his arms. Not defensively. It was his thinking posture. She knew that by now. The healthcare effective date is going to require a phone call to the insurance company, he said, but I can make that call today. The rest of it, he uncrossed his arms. Yes, all of it. She looked at him. You didn't negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate, he said simply. Everything you asked for is fair. I'd have offered most of it myself if I'd been thinking clearly in October. He met her eyes. You earned it, Emily. You earned it before you asked for it. Asking for it doesn't make it more true. She was quiet for a moment. The shop was quiet around them, the early morning quiet before Roy arrived with coffee, and Skeeter arrived with his particular energy, and Curtis arrived and went directly to the bay without speaking to anyone until 10. Just the two of them in the building, like Thursday, except different. Less on the edge of something, more like the beginning of a thing already decided. I want it in writing this week, she said. I'll have the paperwork drafted by Wednesday, he said. By Tuesday, she said. He almost smiled. Tuesday, he said. She sat down at her desk, pulled up the scheduling system. The day's appointments were already sorted. She'd checked them from home Sunday night, a habit she'd developed without deciding to, and the first one was at 8:30. Damien, she said without looking up. Yeah. Thank you for the offer, the real one. Thank you for asking for what you wanted, he said, instead of just taking what was available. She looked up at that. He was already heading back to the office, so she set it to the back of him. The Thai place on 5th, the one with the green awning. Is it open for lunch? He stopped, turned around. Weekdays, he said. 11 to 2. Wednesday, she said. If you're not buried. He looked at her. Something warm happened in his expression that he didn't manage to keep off his face, which was unlike him and which she noted without comment. I'll be available Wednesday, he said. It's not, she started. I know what it is, he said. And what it isn't. She held his gaze for one beat. 2. Then she turned back to the computer. Tuesday for the paperwork, she said. Tuesday, he said, and went back to the office. At 7:58, Roy arrived with 2 coffees instead of 1. He set hers on the desk and looked at her coat on the hook, and the computer open, and the general Tuesday morning arrangement of things, and said, You're staying. I'm staying, she said. Roy nodded, the way he nodded when something confirmed a thing he had already decided was true. Good, he said, and went to the bay. At 8:03, Skeeter arrived and said morning to Emily, and then did a double take as if something in the atmosphere was different. He looked at Emily, then at the back office, then at Emily again. Did something happen? I'm staying, she said. Oh, thank God, he said, with the complete emotional transparency of someone who hadn't yet learned to pretend feelings don't exist. I told Curtis you'd stay. He owes me $10. Emily looked at him. You bet on my employment status. Only because I was confident, Skeeter said quickly. It was a respectful bet. Get Curtis on the line 2 callback before 9, she said, and tell him I said he should pay up. Pocham. The paperwork was on her desk Tuesday morning. Not emailed. Printed, in a manila folder with a sticky note on the front in Damien's handwriting that said, Let me know if anything needs adjusting. She opened it at her desk before anyone else arrived, read every page twice, made 2 small notes in the margin where the language was vague about the scope of vendor authority, and had the folder back on his desk with her notes attached before 8. He came in at 7:32 and found it. She heard him in the office, the sound of pages. Then quiet. Then the sound of him writing. He came out at 7:50 with the revised pages, set them on her desk. The 2 sections had been rewritten with the specificity she'd flagged. She read them, picked up a pen, signed. No ceremony, no handshake. She signed and handed it back, and he took it, and that was that. Except that Roy, who had been watching from the coffee machine, started a slow clap that lasted exactly 4 beats before Curtis said Roy from the bay doorway in a tone that stopped it, and Skeeter, who had apparently been watching for the signing moment, said yes under his breath with a fist slightly raised, which he then lowered when he noticed Emily looking at him. The Tillman invoice needs to go out this morning, Emily said. On it, Skeeter said, and disappeared. She turned back to her computer, pulled up the Brennan account. The regular weekly check-in call was at 9, and she had 2 items to add to the maintenance log. Behind her, she heard Damien say something to Roy that she didn't catch. Roy laughed, a real one, not his usual dry quarter laugh. She didn't turn around. She had what she came for. She had fought for it herself, which mattered more than she could easily explain, and which she did not need to explain to anyone. She had not accepted a favor. She had not been rescued. She had looked at what she'd built and decided it was worth staying for, and then she had named her price, and the price had been met. And she was still herself on every side of that transaction. It was the first time in a long time that she had made a major decision and felt, immediately and without the usual undercurrent of second-guessing, that it was exactly right. At 8:58, she picked up the phone for the Brennan call. At 9:01, the account manager said, "Emily, good to hear your voice. I saw the updated maintenance log. That new format is much cleaner." "Glad it works for you," she said. "I have 2 items to walk you through." She walked him through them. He asked good questions. She had good answers. It took 11 minutes and ended with him saying he'd circulate the updated schedule to his fleet coordinator. She hung up, made a note in the account file, looked at the whiteboard, her whiteboard now officially, in the way things become official when they stop needing to be said. The green entries were gone, had been for months. She had a lunch on Wednesday. She had a title that matched her work. She had a mother who was progressing, genuinely, without caveat. She had a shop that ran the way she had built it to run. She opened the next account file. The morning moved forward the way it did, relentlessly, without waiting for anyone to finish processing anything. For once, she didn't need it to wait. The Thai place on 5th had 12 tables, a handwritten menu board above the counter, and a lunch rush that peaked at 12:15 and made conversation difficult unless you were comfortable leaning slightly forward and speaking at a volume that suggested the thing you were saying mattered enough to repeat, if necessary. Emily and Damien arrived at 11:40, which was Damien's suggestion, and which she had recognized immediately as the move of a man who had been to this restaurant enough times to know about the 12:15 problem. She didn't comment on it. They got a table near the window, the small one with 2 chairs that faced the street, and ordered without much deliberation. She got the basil chicken, he got something with noodles that arrived in a bowl large enough to raise questions about portion philosophy. It was the first time they had been somewhere together that was not the shop. It felt predictably slightly strange. Not bad strange, just the particular strangeness of seeing a person you know well in a context that resets the lighting and removes the familiar furniture of your dynamic. He was still Damien, still had the reading glasses pushed into his hair despite the fact that he had not needed to read anything. But he was also a person sitting across a table from her in the middle of a Wednesday, and that was a different version of the same person. "You're quieter," she said. He looked up from the noodle bowl. "Then what?" "Then at the shop." "You're the same," he said. "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said. "It's just true." She ate for a moment. Outside, 2 people walked past with umbrellas against a sky that couldn't decide what it wanted to do. "You come here often?" she said, and then made a face immediately after because the words had arrived in that order without her permission. He actually smiled at that. A full one, not the partial version she usually got. "Since Sophia was 4, he said. "She likes the spring rolls. She calls them egg rolls, but they're spring rolls, and I've given up correcting her." It was the first time he had mentioned Sophia by name, directly to her, in a personal context rather than in passing. She had known about the daughter the way she knew things at the shop. Not because anyone told her, but because she paid attention. A drawing taped inside his office cabinet that she had glimpsed once through an open door. The pancake conversations she'd overheard fragments of on his phone. The way he left every day at 5:30 with a specific kind of purposefulness that was different from just going home. "How old is she now?" Emily said. 7. He said it the way parents say their child's age, with the slight amazement of someone who keeps doing the math and keeps being surprised by the answer. "She told me last week she wants to be a mechanic when she grows up, which Roy thought was the best thing he'd ever heard." "What did you think?" "I thought she'd change her mind 40 more times before she's 18, and that's fine." He picked up his fork. "She also told me she wants to meet you." Emily looked at him. He said it without strategy, without setup, just put it on the table the way he put most things, directly and without performance. "Why?" Emily said. "Because I talk about the shop," he said, "and apparently I talk about you when I talk about the shop." She noticed. The honesty of that landed somewhere in Emily's chest in a way she didn't fully process in the moment. She looked back at her food. "What do you say?" "When you talk about me." He considered this. that you fix the filing system, that you handle the difficult customers without losing your mind, which I cannot always say for myself, that you found $1,200 in a miscellaneous drawer in the first week." He paused. "That the shop is better because you're there." She was quiet. "She asked if you were my friend," he said. I told her yes. "Is that what we are?" she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. He met her eyes. "I think we're something that started as that and is becoming something I don't have a clean category for," he said. "And I think you know that." She did know that. She had known it for a while and had been living alongside the knowledge the way you live alongside a door you're not ready to open, aware of it, occasionally standing near it, not yet turning the handle. "I'm not good at this," she said, "the part where it becomes something else." "Neither am I," he said. "Genuinely. I have a 7-year-old in a car shop I run in secret from my actual life, and I made a marriage joke to a job applicant in the first 30 seconds of meeting her. My record is not strong." She pressed her lips together against something that was very nearly a laugh. "That was a terrible joke." "It was the worst joke," he said. "I think about it sometimes." "You should," she said. "I know." She ate for a moment. The restaurant was filling up around them, the 12:15 crowd beginning its approach. Outside the window, the sky had made its decision and was delivering a light rain that turned the sidewalk dark and sent the umbrella people walking faster. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "from the shop. I want to be clear about that. Whatever this is or isn't, I signed the paperwork. I'm not someone who lets the personal complicate the professional." "I know that about you," he said. "I'm saying it so there's no ambiguity." "There isn't," he said, "but I appreciate the directness." He looked at her. "For what it's worth, I'm not going to let whatever this is make things weird at work either. You have my word on that." "Your word," she said. "I haven't broken it yet," he said. $11 on Patricia Cho's coolant flush aside. This time she did laugh. Short, real, surprised out of her. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite wonder, but adjacent to it, the way someone looks when they witness something they have been quietly hoping for. "Wednesday lunch," she said. "That's where we start." "Wednesday lunch," he said. "That's where we start." She picked up her fork. "Order the spring rolls next time for reference." "They're very good," he said. "I know, I just ate half of yours." He looked at his plate. She had in fact eaten several of his spring rolls during the conversation in the manner of someone who had decided they were available without asking. He looked back up at her. "You could have just ordered them." "I know," she said, "but yours were right there." He shook his head slowly, and the almost smile on his face was the kind that stays for a while. March came in cold and left warm, the way March sometimes does, and by the time April settled in, the shop had added its first new fleet account since the Marsh conversation, a regional delivery company called Hartwell Logistics, 31 vehicles, a contract that Emily had negotiated directly, start to finish, because that was what operations managers did, and because the Hartwell account manager had shaken her hand at the start of the meeting and asked what her role was, and when she'd told him had said, "Good, you're the one I'll be working with then," in the manner of a person who had been burned before by unclear chains of communication and appreciated knowing immediately who was actually in charge. Damien had not been in the room for the negotiation. He had stayed in the bay. She had come back with a signed contract and a maintenance schedule and a start date, and handed him the paperwork without commentary, and he had read it and said, "Hartwell, 31 vehicles. Effective May 1st, she said. He had looked at her over the top of the paperwork with an expression she had by then learned to read without difficulty. It was the Roy expression, the one that said something was true and had been true for a while, and the only difference was that now there was evidence. "Outstanding," he said. "I know," she said, and went back to her desk. Roy had gotten the news from Skeeter, who had gotten it from the sound of the front office, because Skeeter had an inexplicable talent for reading the emotional weather of a room from 50 feet away, and had appeared at the coffee machine with a third cup, which he set on the corner of the desk without a word. Emily had looked at the 3 cups, hers, the shop's, and the extra, and understood that Roy was celebrating in the only language he used, Curtis had come in from the bay at 4 and said, "Hartwell?" And Emily had said yes. And Curtis had said good and gone back to the bay. And that was Curtis's version of a standing ovation. Skeeter had hugged her, briefly, and with the energy of a golden retriever who had just been told it was going to the park. And she had tolerated it with the expression of a woman who was not a hugger but could make exceptions for Skeeter because Skeeter was constitutionally incapable of performing emotion he didn't feel. The Wednesday lunches had continued. Every week, without discussion, they arrived at the Thai place at 11:40 and ordered and talked and ate. And the thing between them grew in the slow and sometimes awkward way things grow when two people are being careful about something they both care about not getting wrong. He told her about Sophia, not in the organized way of a person constructing a narrative, but in the scattered, real way of a parent who thinks about their child constantly, and sometimes that thinking comes out sideways during conversations about other things. Sophia was funny. She had opinions about breakfast that were more developed than most adults' opinions about anything. She had recently decided that Roy, whom she had met once when she came to the shop after school, was the coolest person she had ever encountered, a verdict she had delivered to Damien with complete seriousness, and which Damien had relayed to Roy, and which Roy had received with visible, undisguised pleasure. He told her, at lunch in the 5th week, about Sophia's mother. Not in detail. It was not a story that needed detail, and he seemed to know that. "We were 26, he said. We thought we wanted the same life. We didn't. It took us 3 years and one small person to understand that clearly, and by then the right thing was to stop." He looked at the table. "She's in Seattle now. She's remarried. Sophia sees her in the summers." He looked up. It wasn't a war. It was just two people who discovered too late that they were wrong for each other. Emily had listened without filling the space with comfort. That was one of the things he had noticed about her. She did not rush to soothe. She waited to see if you needed soothing or just needed to be heard, and she responded to what was actually there. "Do you miss it?" she said. "The idea of it. The family you thought it would be." He thought about it genuinely. "I miss the idea," he said. "Not the specific reality, which probably means the idea was what I wanted, not her specifically." He paused. "I've thought about that, what it means about me." "It means you're honest," she said. "Some people spend a whole lifetime not making that distinction." He looked at her. "What about you?" She was quiet for a moment. She did not offer things easily. He had learned to wait. "I was with someone for 2 years, she said, before my mom's accident. He wasn't a bad person, he just—" She stopped, found the words. "When it got hard, he got smaller. Like difficulty made him less. And I don't think I can be with someone who gets small when things get hard." She looked at the table. "That probably sounds harsh." "It sounds true," he said. "I've been told it's a high bar." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just the right bar." She looked at him. He met her eyes without flinching, which was something she had noticed about him from the beginning. He did not look away from things that were uncomfortable. He looked at them steadily, the way you look at something you intend to deal with honestly. She thought, sitting across that table in a small restaurant with 12 tables and a 12:15 problem, that she had spent the last several years managing everything alone, partly because it was necessary, and partly because she had stopped believing that there was anyone in her life who would not eventually get small. She was starting, carefully, to revise that. Her mother came home in April. Not the dramatic movie version of coming home, not walking in the door unaided with color in her cheeks and everything resolved. Margaret Carter came home in a wheelchair that she intended to be done with in 6 weeks, and expressed this intention loudly to anyone who stood still long enough to hear it, and the apartment had been adjusted to accommodate it, and Emily had spent 2 Saturdays in February installing grab bars in the bathroom and rearranging furniture while her mother supervised from the doorway and offered corrections. "That chair goes 2 feet left," Margaret said. "The chair's fine," Emily said. "The chair is 2 feet to the right of where it needs to be." "Mom?" "Emily." The chair moved 2 feet to the left. It did look better. On the day Margaret came home, Emily had taken the day off. The first full day she had taken since starting at the shop, not counting the medical appointment Friday in November. Damien had texted her at 8 in the morning. "Everything covered. Take the whole day." She had not replied immediately, and then had replied, "The Hartwell Weekly Report is in the shared folder." He had replied, "I know. Go be with your mother." She had put her phone in her pocket and gone to pick Margaret up. In the car, Margaret looked out the window at the city going past and said nothing for several minutes, which was unusual enough for Emily to notice. "You okay?" Emily said. "I'm looking at things," Margaret said. "I haven't looked at things from a car window in 5 months." Emily was quiet. She let her look. At a red light, Margaret said, "Tell me about him." Emily kept her eyes on the light. "I haven't told you there's a him." "No," Margaret said. "Margaret, you've just been different for 3 months, and you get a specific look when you say his name on the phone, which you do more often than you realize." The light changed. Emily drove. "His name is Damien," she said. It's complicated." "Is he married?" "No." "Is he a bad person?" "No, She thought about how to say it accurately. "He's the most consistently decent person I've met in a long time," which is its own kind of complicated when you're not used to it. Margaret looked at her. "Because you keep waiting for the part where it stops." Emily said nothing, which was its own answer. "It might not stop," Margaret said. "Some things don't." "I know that intellectually," Emily said. "Intellectually is a coward's version of knowing," Margaret said, not unkindly. "At some point you have to let it be real." Emily pulled into the parking space outside the apartment, turned off the engine, sat for a moment. "He has a daughter," she said. "Sophia. She's 7. Margaret was quiet. "I haven't met her yet," Emily said. "He hasn't pushed. He's been—" She stopped. "Patient is the wrong word because it sounds like waiting. It's more like he's just there, present, without pressure." "That's not the wrong word," Margaret said. "That's exactly the right word. Patient doesn't mean passive. It means you're willing to let something grow at the right speed." She opened the car door with the careful deliberateness of someone relearning a thing. "Help me out of this thing and let's go inside. I want to see my kitchen." Emily helped her out. They went inside and Margaret stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her kitchen for a long moment. The way she had looked at the city from the car window with the particular attention of someone returning to a thing they had not been sure they'd see again. "The grab bar in the bathroom," Margaret said. "Left of the sink," Emily said. "Good placement." She turned. "Thank you. For all of it. The visits, the appointments, She stopped. Margaret did not have a big vocabulary for gratitude, had always expressed love through action rather than statement, which was where Emily had learned it. "All of it," she said again. "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to. I want to." Margaret looked at her. "You held everything together, Emily, for a year and a half. By yourself. And it's okay now to put some of it down." Emily stood in her mother's kitchen in the afternoon light and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't entirely known was tight. Not a dramatic loosening, just the specific, quiet release of a thing that has been held for a long time and finally doesn't need to be. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Margaret said. "Now, make tea. I've been thinking about my own kettle for 4 months." She met Sophia on a Saturday in May. It happened because Sophia made it happen, which was entirely consistent with what Emily knew of her by then. Damien had mentioned at Wednesday lunch that Sophia had informed him she would like to come to the shop sometime, a request she had apparently made with the focused determination of a 7-year-old who had decided something was going to happen and was waiting for the adults to catch up. Emily had said, "Bring her Saturday, we're not busy in the morning." He had looked at her. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "I want to meet her." She meant it. That was the thing. She said it and then examined whether she meant it, which was a habit she had, and the answer was yes. She was curious about the person who had apparently decided Roy was the coolest adult she'd ever met, and who wanted to be a mechanic, and who had noticed that her father talked about Emily when he talked about the shop. Sophia arrived at 9:15 on a Saturday in May, wearing overalls and sneakers and an expression of comprehensive interest in everything she saw. She was small for 7, with dark eyes that moved fast and a manner of entering a room that suggested she was simultaneously assessing it for interesting features and deciding how she felt about everyone in it. She stopped in front of Emily's desk. Emily looked up. "You're Emily," Sophia said. Not a question. "I am," Emily said. "You're Sophia. Dad said you fixed the filing system." "I did." Sophia considered this. "He couldn't find anything before," she said. "I came once and he couldn't find the stapler for like 10 minutes. "The stapler is now in the top left drawer," Emily said, "with the tape." Sophia nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Can I see the whiteboard?" Emily gestured at it. Sophia went to the whiteboard and stood in front of it, with her hands behind her back in a posture that was, Emily realized, exactly Damien's posture when he was looking at something he was thinking about. The similarity was so specific and so unselfconscious that she felt something move in her chest that she had no immediate name for. "What do the colors mean?" Sophia said. Emily came and stood beside her. "Red is urgent, needs to be done today. Blue is scheduled, has a specific time. Black is routine. Green used to mean overdue, but we don't have green ones anymore." Sophia looked at the board. "Who decides which color?" "I do, mostly." "What if you pick the wrong color?" "Then I fix it," Emily said. Sophia turned and looked at her with Damien's directness. "Do you like working here?" "I do," Emily said. "Dad likes it better now," Sophia said, with the casual authority of a child who simply reports what is true. "He's less stressed. He makes better pancakes on Saturdays." She thought about this. "I think the pancakes are related." Emily looked at her. Behind Sophia, through the glass partition, she could see Damien in the bay with Roy, both of them leaning over something under a hood, and he was not watching them, which she suspected was deliberate. "I think so too," Emily said. Sophia decided, in the way 7-year-olds decide things, abruptly and completely, that she approved of Emily. She demonstrated this by asking if she could sit in the office chair and spin in it, which Emily said yes to, and by asking Roy approximately 45 questions about brake systems, which Roy answered with more patience and detail than he applied to most adult conversations, which said more about Roy than most things did. By 11, Sophia had declared that she wanted to come back next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Damien, leaning in the office doorway, looked at Emily. Emily looked at him. "Saturdays are generally slow," she said. "She's welcome." And that was how it started. Not with a conversation, not with a decision, but with a 7-year-old in overalls who spun in an office chair and asked Roy about brake systems, and told her father, on the drive home, that Emily was the kind of person who knows where things are, which Sophia meant as the highest possible compliment. Things did not proceed smoothly after that, because they never do. There was a week in June when Emily and Damien disagreed, genuinely and without resolution for 3 days, about whether to take on a second mechanic. She thought yes, the Hartwell account had stretched Curtis and Roy to a point that was affecting turnaround times, and she had the data to support it. He was cautious in the way of someone who had watched small businesses overextend on optimism, and his caution was not unreasonable, and they both knew the other had a legitimate point, which made it more frustrating rather than less. The disagreement happened in the office, with voices raised enough that Skeeter found a reason to be in the far bay, and it ended not with one of them conceding, but with both of them agreeing to wait 2 weeks and look at the turnaround numbers again, which was the compromise neither of them loved and both of them could live with. 2 weeks later, the numbers supported Emily's case. They hired a mechanic named Diana, who was 29 and had worked at a dealership for 4 years and had left because, as she explained in the interview, she was tired of being told she was too methodical, which Curtis interpreted as, "She'll fit in fine." Damien told Emily on a Wednesday at the Thai place that she had been right about Diana. "I know," Emily said. "I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." She looked at him. "Thank you for saying it anyway." "I've been wrong before," he said. "I'll probably be wrong again." "I know," she said. "So will I." "I know that too," he said. "And I'm not—" He stopped, started again in the way he did when he was finding the actual sentence underneath the first attempt. "I'm not asking you to be right all the time. I'm asking you to keep telling me when you think I'm wrong." She held his gaze. "You could have just said you want a partner," she said. "I could have," he said. "That's the word." Outside, May had become a warm June, and the street was busy with the midweek lunch crowd. and inside the restaurant the 12:15 rush was building around them, and none of it was particularly cinematic or remarkable. Just two people at a table by the window, being honest with each other about what they wanted, which is one of the harder things people do and one of the more important ones. "Partner," she said, and she held out her hand across the table, not in the formal way, just laid it there, palm up. He put his hand in hers. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She looked at their hands. He looked at her face. "Wednesday next week," she said. "I'll be here at 11:40, he said. He asked her to marry him 9 months later, not at a restaurant, not with a speech. He did it at the shop on a Tuesday morning in March, because that was where they both were and because he could not, apparently, get through Tuesday morning without it. He came out of the back office at 8:15, when the shop was quiet before the day started, when Roy hadn't arrived yet and the phones hadn't begun, and it was just the two of them in the building with the early light coming through the front window. He had a ring. He'd had it for 3 weeks, had been carrying it in his jacket pocket in the manner of a man who was waiting for the right moment, and had finally accepted that there was no right moment, there was only the moment you were in. He came to her desk. She was reading through the day's schedule, coffee in hand, still in her coat. She looked up. He put the ring on the desk. Not in the box. The ring, just set there on the desk calendar between Tuesday's 8:30 appointment and the Hartwell weekly call. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't need someone to complete anything," he said. "I don't need someone to fix what's missing or fill what's empty. I just—" He stopped. Found it. "I want to do this with you. All of it. The shop and the Saturdays and the whiteboard and whatever comes after. With you specifically. Because you're the person I want to figure things out with." He looked at her. "I know it's 8:15 on a Tuesday." "It is," she said. "I couldn't wait anymore," he said. She looked at the ring on the desk calendar. She looked at him, at his face, which was not performing anything. Not confidence, not certainty, not romantic inevitability. He looked like a man who had said a true thing and was waiting to find out what happened next, which was the most honest she had ever seen anyone look. She picked up the ring. "Yes," she said. Not after a pause, not after a long look or a deep breath. Just yes, immediate and clear, the way she said things when she had already been thinking about them for months, and the words finally had somewhere to go. He let out a breath he had been holding since he'd walked out of the office. She saw it leave him. He reached across the desk, and she put her hand in his, and he held it the way he had at the restaurant, not tightly, not possessively, just present. 8:15 on a Tuesday, she said. "I know. Roy's going to be here in 10 minutes. I know. He's going to figure it out immediately. He's going to figure it out before he walks through the door," Damien said. "Roy always knows." She looked at the ring on her hand. It was simple. She would have told him that if he'd asked, and apparently he had understood without asking. "It's right," she said. "Good," he said. "I spent a week on it." "A week?" 3 weeks, he said. "On this one specifically. I looked at a lot of rings." She looked up. Something in her expression shifted. Not tearful, not overcome, just deeply and quietly moved in the way of a person who has spent a long time being careful and has finally, in one unceremonious morning, allowed themselves not to be. "Damien, yeah, I would have told you what I liked." "I know," he said. "I wanted to figure it out." Roy walked through the door at 8:23, looked at Emily's hand, looked at Damien, and set the coffees on the desk. 3 of them, 1 extra, which meant he'd known before he'd left the coffee shop, which meant he'd known before he walked in, which meant he had somehow known. "Congratulations," he said, not to either of them specifically, to the room. Then he went to the bay. Skeeter arrived at 8:30 and lasted approximately 40 seconds before he said, "Wait, is that a ring?" And the day became exactly as undignified and warm and real as everything else at Ashcroft Auto, which meant people talked over each other and Curtis said "good" in that way of his that contained a universe. And Diana, who had been there 6 months and had fit in immediately, said, "Okay, but who called it?" And Skeeter said, "Me. I called it in October." Emily sat at her desk with the ring on her hand and the 8:30 appointment arriving and the Hartwell call at 9. And she answered the phone and confirmed the appointment and wrote the note in the account file and did all the things that needed doing, the way she had been doing them for 11 months. Except that today the desk was hers. The title was hers. The decision to stay had been hers. The yes had been hers. That was the part people sometimes didn't understand about the story of Emily Carter. The version Roy would eventually tell his son. The version Skeeter would tell anyone who stood still. The version that got simplified in the retelling into something about a woman who got lucky, or a man who saved someone, or a love story that resolved itself the way love stories do in movies. The truth was less cinematic and more true. Emily had not been rescued. She had arrived at a place that needed her, and she had done the work unglamorously and without waiting for recognition, and she had built something that had not existed before she got there. She had looked at a fair offer and a generous offer, and chosen the one that cost her more to earn, because earning it herself was the only version of having it she could live with. She had said yes to a man not because she needed him, but because she had spent almost a year watching who he was when things were hard, and who he was when things were hard was who she wanted to stand next to. That was not a fairy tale. That was a choice made by a person who understood what choices cost and made it anyway. Her mother came to the shop the following Saturday. Driven by a neighbor, walking now with a cane she had accepted with considerably less argument than anyone expected, and met Sophia for the first time in the small front office, and the two of them immediately occupied opposite ends of the office chair and had a conversation about Roy that Emily did not fully follow, but that ended with both of them laughing, which was its own kind of answer to a question nobody had thought to ask. Margaret had looked at the whiteboard, then at the desk, then at the shop. Through the glass, where Damien was in the bay and Roy and Diana were working, and Skeeter was, as always, somewhere he shouldn't be, but not in a way that caused immediate problems. "You built this," she said to Emily. "We built it," Emily said. Margaret looked at her. "You built it," she said again, and this time Emily didn't argue. They got married in September, not a big wedding. Neither of them wanted a big wedding. Damien, because he'd done the large event with an open bar and a guest list full of people who came because of his money. Emily, because the idea of 100 people watching her do something private made her tired just thinking about it. 30 people, a backyard. Roy wore a tie that Skeeter later said must have come from a time capsule. Curtis wore the same expression he wore everywhere, which was focused and present and slightly intimidating, and got visibly emotional during the vows in a way he would have denied if asked. Diana caught the bouquet and looked at it with the expression of someone who hadn't been trying, but wasn't unhappy about the outcome. Skeeter cried openly and without apology. Margaret sat in the front row in a chair. The cane leaned against it, not needed for balance as much as habit now, and watched her daughter stand across from a man who was looking at Emily the way people look at things they intend to keep. Sophia stood next to Damien in a green dress she had chosen herself and held the rings in a small velvet box with the seriousness of someone entrusted with something important. When the moment came, she presented the box with both hands, formally, and Damien said thank you, and she said you're welcome, and the 30 people laughed, and Sophia looked at the crowd with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done the job correctly. After, in the particular warmth of a September evening in a backyard strung with lights. Because Sophia had insisted on lights, and she had been entirely right about the lights, Emily stood with her mother while Damien talked to Roy about something that made them both laugh, and Sophia wove between adults with the ease of a child who had decided she belonged everywhere. "He looks at you like you're real," Margaret said. Emily watched him. "What does that mean?" "It means some people get looked at like they're an idea, a version, something someone decided they needed." Margaret watched too. "He looks at you like you're specifically you, not what he wanted you to be." Emily thought about this. "Is that rare?" "Yes," Margaret said. "It is." Sophia appeared beside Emily and slipped a hand into hers with the ease of someone who had been doing it for months, which she had. Saturday after Saturday, whiteboard explanation after whiteboard explanation, until the hand-holding had become as unremarkable as Roy's coffee, which is to say, it was everything, and it announced itself as nothing. Emily looked down at her. Sophia looked up. "You're my other person now," Sophia said, in the straightforward way of a 7-year-old who has decided something and sees no reason to dress it up. Emily squeezed her hand. "Yeah," she said, "I am." Across the backyard, Damien looked over and found Emily's eyes in the way he had developed of always knowing where she was in a room. She met his gaze. He gave a small nod. Not at anything specific, just the nod of a person checking that the person they're thinking about is still there, still real, still the thing they decided to build a life around. She gave the same nod back. The shop would open Monday. The Hartwell account had added 6 vehicles in the spring. Diana had turned out to be exactly as methodical as advertised, which Curtis had decided made her the most trustworthy person on the team. Roy had started taking Fridays off, which no one had suggested, and which he'd simply begun doing 1 week in July without explanation, and which Damien and Emily had looked at each other about and then left alone, because Roy had earned every Friday he wanted. The life they had built was not perfect. It had a leaking pipe under a kitchen sink that had finally been fixed in May, and a 7-year-old who had opinions about everything, and a mother with a cane and a fighting spirit, and a shop that had good weeks and difficult weeks, and at least 1 week per quarter where something went wrong that no one had planned for, and they handled it the way they handled everything, by showing up and doing the work and not pretending it was easy. It was enough. More than enough. It was the thing that money could not manufacture and luck could not deliver, and no one could hand to you across a desk. The specific result of 2 people who had decided, separately and then together, that the right life was worth building carefully and imperfectly and with their eyes open. Emily had walked through the door of a shop on a rainy October morning with $43 and a destroyed folder and the careful wariness of a woman who had learned that good things came with catches. She had been wrong about that. Not because the world had changed or because the catches had disappeared or because anything had been handed to her, but because she had stayed long enough and fought hard enough and chosen clearly enough to find out that some things, the real ones, the ones built slowly and honestly and by hand, don't come with catches. They just come.